Welcome to SEA145, Robust Core Vocabulary and Navigation. This is for the Educational Assistant Diploma Program. At the end of this session, you should be able to understand the rationale for choosing a large AAC vocabulary, list the components of a linguistically robust vocabulary, understand the role of motor planning in AAC, define and give examples of core and fringe vocabulary, and understand 3 different means of AAC navigation. So here are the topics we will cover: AAC glossary, size of vocabulary, linguistically robust vocabulary, motor planning, word classes and grammatical forms, alphabet keyboard, pre-programmed messages, core and fringe vocabulary, and navigation. Next step, language. Once the communication tool is chosen, it may be an eye gaze system or an iPad or other options. The next step is to consider the content or language that will be on the device. The words in the AAC device are referred to as a vocabulary. The words are programmed onto buttons, and each level or page within a vocabulary has a certain number of buttons per page. Here's a visual to help you understand. Here is the home page of a vocabulary. This is the page that the user starts from. By pressing the Actions button in the top row of this page, you will navigate to this page, which is the Verbs page. By clicking on the blue arrow, which is a navigation button, you will go to page 2 of the Verbs. Many of these pages combined are called the student's vocabulary. All of the small squares on each page are called the buttons. On most pages, in the top left corner, you will see a yellow house. That is the home button, which will navigate you back to the home page. Size of vocabulary. How do we choose the size of the vocabulary to program onto our students' AAC system? Well, I'm going to give you 3 activities to choose from for this weekend. Use your simple communication system to tell me which one you want to do. So your choices are to clean dirty toilets, to host a birthday party with 15 7-year-old boys, or dig up potatoes. So go ahead and let me know your choice. Which activity would you like to do? Make a choice. You're showing refusal behavior because you didn't make a choice. You must not have understood what those choices meant. Your cognitive skills are too low for this communication system. Maybe you didn't understand the symbols. If I change the symbols to photos, maybe you'll be able to make a choice. We hear this from teams often. A student may come into the district with an iPad and app programmed with 4 choices, which they have been working on for months and months. Whenever the iPad is brought out, the student exhibits behaviors. Imagine how unimpressed you would be to see the same choices that you have been presented with week after week because you haven't reached mastery. Then your support people start to believe that you don't have the cognitive skills to interpret symbols or to understand the language. Because you haven't made progress and you can't consistently make a choice from 4 buttons, your EA decides that the iPad isn't an appropriate communication tool for you and puts it away. Maybe you were thinking of something else. The choice you wanted wasn't offered, so you didn't make a choice. You have no way to let your communication partner know you didn't like any of the choices and that you really want to visit your best friend and jump on the trampoline with her. It's quite alarming when we see staff putting limits and making judgments about a student's abilities based on these beliefs. It's very unlikely we would set up a student's AAC system with only 4 buttons. It doesn't support language learning. If there are only 4 buttons, it's just a high-tech choice board, not a language system. If there are only 4 buttons, that's all the language that you can model for that child. When we speak to our typically developing children, we don't use the same words over and over until they've mastered those 4 words and then give them 4 new words. No, we immerse them in language. We talk about what we see, what we're doing, what they are doing, and we provide a language-rich environment. Children with complex communication needs are only going to learn the words that we give them. We have a huge responsibility to choose those words wisely, to provide them with language skills to become independent communicators. We really have no idea how much our students with complex communication needs know. And more often than not, they surprise us with what they do know and what they're capable of understanding. We need to set the bar high for our AAC users when it comes to giving them language. Start with more words, more than the child is currently using, as many words as the child can physically and visually access. When we choose the vocabulary, the number of buttons on a page will determine the size of the buttons. So the more buttons on a page, the smaller the buttons get. We must consider the student's visual skills. How small of a button are they able to see? And what are their motor skills and targeting abilities like? Are they able to accurately target a small button? These are important factors to consider when choosing a vocabulary set. You can begin by masking words to simplify the pages when the child becomes familiar with the vocabulary. In order to provide strong language models, you need to have access to a variety of vocabulary buttons. We typically try to choose a vocabulary with the largest amount of buttons that a student can access. This is a language system that they will be growing with. Expect more. We need to presume competence and set the bar high by providing a linguistically robust vocabulary. When we set up a vocabulary for a student, we need to ensure that we provide that individual with a linguistically robust vocabulary. I'm going to share the components of a linguistically robust vocabulary, and then I'm going to go over each of these points in detail. First of all, it supports motor automaticity. There are a wide range of word classes. It has use of grammatical forms. It includes an alphabet keyboard with word prediction. It has some pre-programmed messages or phrases. And finally, a core vocabulary of at least 300 words and fringe vocabulary. First of all, let's talk about how it supports motor automaticity. The ability for a vocabulary to support growth while maintaining consistent access to words through learned motor plans. We use muscle memory and motor automaticity every day within our routine tasks. When we open up apps on our phones, we know exactly where they are without really thinking about it, unless our kids move them around, and then we become frustrated when our finger goes to the usual spot and it's not there. Do you ever drive home from work the same route every day, and then when you get home, you can't even remember driving home? That is motor memory that got you there. And those of us who are old enough and took typing class in high school, remember how slow and difficult it was at the beginning? We had to look at every letter on every key to find them. Now we type and our fingers go to each key automatically We don't have to look or even think about what our hands are doing. Motor memory. Have you ever tried typing on an alphabetic keyboard instead of a QWERTY keyboard? Here's a QWERTY keyboard that we're all familiar with from our computers. And this is an alphabetic keyboard in ABC order. If you ever try typing your own name on an alphabetic keyboard, you will notice how long it takes to locate each letter because we are all so used to using QWERTY keyboards. All of a sudden, we are really slow as we try to find each letter. It requires relearning. Our focus shifts to the movements required to type the message rather than the message itself. Automaticity. This is the ability to do something without thinking about it. Motor memory results in automaticity. As a student learns navigational pathways on an AAC system, finding the words within the vocabulary becomes more automatic and requires less attention. Automaticity frees up cognitive resources, which can be dedicated to other areas of language, in the case of AAC, language learning. These factors are also very important for our AAC users in becoming fluent communicators. Symbol placement versus symbol recognition. A student doesn't need to accurately identify the symbols in his communication system before he can use that symbol to communicate a message. For example, asking a student to point to want or show me happy. Holding up the symbols on flashcards and having the student match them on their AAC device isn't going to help them develop language and meaning for those symbols. If we model those words and symbols while they happen during play and daily routines, then they will begin to understand what those symbols and words mean. Vocabulary must be taught within a meaningful context in order for us to facilitate language development. So consistent placement of the symbols and using them within a meaningful context are often more important than symbol recognition. This is especially true when teaching abstract core vocabulary symbols. It is much more difficult to symbolize abstract words like is or now or fast than concrete nouns like cat or chicken or pizza, which are clear representations of the choices. As a user becomes a more fluent communicator, he relies more on automaticity than symbol recognition. So go back to the typing example. Once you become a fluent typer, you aren't looking at the letters on the keys at all. You're relying on your motor planning to get you to the keys. Motor automaticity and AAC. So how does this information guide our teaching of AAC? Stop. Do not move the buttons or words. We always tell our EAs it's really important to leave the buttons where they are. I'll say that one more time. Leave the buttons where they are. There are so many levels of navigation in a vocabulary that if you change one button, it will impact the entire system and it's often difficult to correct. You can program on a blank button, but never move, change, or delete an existing button. If you need more vocabulary added, call your AAC SLP and they will help you. Moving words to different locations in an AAC vocabulary results in frustration, more cognitive energy spent learning the new location of the word, and slower communication. So when we have EAs say, well, I just want to move the words around to make sure that he knows them. Well, no, if he's learned them once in that location, then we're not going to move them to try to test him. That's just going to lead to frustration. Consistent button placement and growth. Leaving the buttons in the same locations support motor memory. We may determine that a student will grow into a large vocabulary. However, to begin with, we mask or hide buttons to simplify it. As the vocabulary grows and more buttons are revealed, the placement of the buttons remains constant. So we may choose this vocabulary setup for a student. It looks like an awful lot of buttons, but at the beginning, we are able to hide or mask buttons in order to make it much simpler for a beginning user. As they begin to progress and more buttons are revealed, the words that they have learned initially will remain in the same spot. The student will not have to relearn those original 4 words as new words are added. If you start with a grid that has only 4 buttons, and then you increase it to 20 buttons per page, now those first 4 words have moved to a different location. The student has to relearn the motor plan for those 4 words. It's very inefficient and slows down a student's progress significantly. A robust vocabulary should also have a wide range of word classes. An AAC system that is programmed with strictly nouns only permits 2 language functions, to request and to label. In order to generate a greater variety of language functions, the vocabulary requires pronouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositions, etc. The orange buttons are pronouns, the pink buttons are verbs, the green buttons are prepositions, and so on. With a wide range of word classes available to the AAC user, it's possible to ask questions, tell stories, describe, comment, protest, etc. A linguistically robust vocabulary also has grammatical forms. Access to grammatical forms allows the user to say exactly what they want to say. Morphological markers, such as verb tenses, pluralization, and comparatives and superlatives allow for more precise message formulation. With a simplistic vocabulary, your language will sound like a caveman. Yesterday was go playground. With grammatical markers, you can now say exactly what you're intending. Yesterday, I went to the playground. Of course, at the beginning, these grammatical markers are not essential for a beginning language learner at the single word level. But as their language skills progress, they will begin to learn about grammar, and it's important that they have access to those forms. Alphabet keyboard with word prediction. All AAC systems should provide access to a keyboard. Even if the user can't read or write yet, the ability to scribble is important. Think about our young children when they first begin to write words. They write lines on paper and say, "Look what I wrote." That is equivalent to an AAC user pressing random alphabet buttons on their keyboard. It's an essential stage of literacy development. We can model writing on the keyboard. The AAC user should have the ability to start writing and seeing writing with the keyboard on their AAC as soon as possible. Here's an example of a keyboard on an AAC device with predictive text. A robust vocabulary will have some pre-programmed messages and phrases. So a robust system will have access to core vocabulary words. This is when each button has a single word, and some pre-programmed messages. And this is when a button might have a phrase or a sentence on it. For example, a user always wants to know what happens next. He can combine 7 buttons to ask, "What will we do on the weekend?" Rather than recreating that question each time he wants to say it, we program the entire question on a single button so he can say it quickly and easily anytime. What are some of the benefits of pre-programmed messages? Well, it cuts down on fatigue. It makes language expression more efficient with commonly used utterances and helps speed up conversations. It invites language input from communication partners. They don't have to wait as long for the message to be generated. It provides a way to communicate emergency messages. So, for example, I'm having a seizure or I need to use the washroom, please. And it's a tool to repair communication breakdowns. So you might program a button to say, ask me a yes or no question, or that's not what I'm trying to say, or tell me what category it's in. So why don't we program most buttons with pre-programmed messages and phrases? Wouldn't it be easier for the user? Full sentences or questions should never make up the majority of the language options on anyone's AAC system. If we program each button on a user's system, we are basically deciding what they are able to say. The only way they can generate their own messages and communicate their own thoughts and ideas is if they have single word buttons to construct their own sentences. When pre-programmed sentences by themselves are the priority pages in an AAC system, we are not giving the learner the chance to develop independent communication, which is our ultimate goal. SNUG, that stands for spontaneous, novel, utterance, generation. We want our students to have the ability to say anything about anything at any given time. And this is possible with core word buttons, which allow for generative language. So core vocabulary and fringe vocabulary are the last components of a linguistically robust vocabulary. The English language has at least 250,000 words. However, a list of around 200 words accounts for about 80% of the words we use every day. These words are called core words. They are usually pronouns, helping verbs, prepositions, articles, and common verbs. Here's an example of a 40-word core vocabulary board. You can see how words like this, that, different, and what are core words, which are difficult to represent in symbol form. Fringe vocabulary are words that are more specific to a situation, and they're mostly nouns. Nouns are people, places, or things. They cannot be used across a variety of situations. We don't talk in nouns. We wouldn't say coffee, desk, chair, book, library. We need core vocabulary to formulate sentences. You cannot form a sentence with only fringe words. Fringe words are easier to visualize. Fringe words are personal to every individual. We each have certain topics we really like to talk about, people, places, and things that are most important in our lives. So my fringe words are going to be very different from your fringe words, as we have our things that we like to talk about that are meaningful to us. These words need to be accessible to the user in fringe folders without too many navigation steps. An AAC system needs a balance between core and personal fringe words. When we think of vocabulary that consists of core and fringe vocabulary, we know that we want it to have about 80% core and 20% fringe. Core words are non-picture producing or difficult to represent in symbols. Fringe vocabulary, which are most often nouns, are easy to produce symbols of. Core vocabulary are often multi-meaning words. Think about the core word turn. We could say, I'm going to turn the page, turn the light on, or it's my turn to have dessert. Fringe vocabulary only have a single meaning. Core vocabulary are consistent across people and situations, whereas fringe vocabulary are different across people. We all have our own fringe vocabulary that are important in our own lives. Core vocabulary consists of verbs, pronouns, adjectives, and question words, whereas fringe vocabulary consists of nouns. Why should I use one of the vocabulary templates included with my AAC app instead of programming my own? Well, first of all, the programming is already done for you. Robust AAC systems have evidence-based research behind them, align with best practice, and follow a language development model. When we see AAC vocabularies that are built from scratch, the buttons only consist of nouns usually, such as snack items or toys. This is basically a high-tech choice board. A choice board is not a language system. It limits the user to only one language function, requesting. The words that are put into a robust vocabulary provide for many different language functions. It isn't too much. Be patient, learn the language, simplify it, mask buttons, practice, make mistakes. It's okay. If a vocabulary is deleted from a student's device, we can simply reload the vocabulary template and all of the buttons are in the same place, so the motor plan remains consistent. Navigation. You navigate through an AAC system when you press a button which leads you to a new page within the vocabulary. This is how an AAC user learns to navigate through their vocabulary. Sometimes you have to press several buttons to get to the word you're looking for. Think of navigation in an AAC system like traveling to a new place. The first time you might go slowly as you have to follow the visual and auditory cues from your GPS. You have to read the street signs and you might get lost along the way. As the location becomes more familiar, you no longer require external cues and it's quicker and easier for you to find your destination. So think of AAC users. When they're learning at the beginning, we might press buttons to navigate them to the correct page, or we may give them cues to help them navigate through pages. Over time, as their motor patterns strengthen, they begin to require less support and are able to navigate through their vocabulary independently. Types of vocabulary navigation. The vocabularies within AAC systems can typically be organized by three basic navigation means. Linguistically based, which can be semantic, syntactic, or by word association. Environmentally based, or pragmatically functionally based. I'm going to explain each of these to you. So the first is linguistically based navigation, and we're going to consider the semantic syntactic category organization first of all. So in this case, the words are organized by class categories. So for example, verbs, pronouns, adjectives, and nouns. So it's very easy for most people to understand. Here are the categories that are organized, appropriate for AAC users with good receptive language skills. Another linguistic manner of organization is word association. So this originated in the mid-80s by Bruce Baker for the MinSpeak system, and it's accomplished by using a single multi-meaning symbol. So the symbol of apple can have many different meanings depending on what button is pressed in combination with this button. So it may say a verb like bite or eat. It may say a color, red, or a feeling, hungry, or the category, fruit. This requires more explanation to begin with and relies heavily on motor planning and motor memory. This is preferable for AAC users who have strong motor recall but weaker receptive language skills and visual processing challenges. Another means of organization is through environmentally based navigation. Here, topics are pre-programmed messages organized by specific situations. They provide quick access to common messages within a familiar context. So this page is based on the topic meals. So all of the words and phrases on this page will be language that you would use when engaged in mealtime. These pages are useful for highly repetitive activities throughout the day. And the messages are arranged on the page by communicative intent. So there will be questions, requests, comments, etc. Pragmatically based navigation. So this is the initial branch of a pod book, which, as the name suggests, is based on a pragmatic style of navigation. In these systems, organization is based on the function of a person's message. Messages are organized based on their purpose. For example, I want something, or something's wrong, or I have a question. In summary, when we choose a vocabulary for a student's AAC device, we need to ensure that we set the bar high. By including a linguistically robust vocabulary, an AAC user is able to generate messages to communicate their own thoughts and ideas. This is the ultimate form of independence. Consideration of the student's language abilities, visual processing, and motor planning skills help determine the organization of the vocabulary and how the student navigates through the pages. The AAC device itself is only the tool. It's when the vocabulary is programmed into it that it becomes a language system for the individual who uses it. Here are our references for this presentation. And we've come to the end. Thank you so much for listening.